Welcome to the Pivot Point Podcast. This season, I'm focused on inclusive leadership and how to lead like an ally. In this episode, I will share some ideas and insights from my new research for my new book, Lead Like an Ally, and leave you with some actionable tips to think about and discuss with your organization. I share this information because inclusive leadership is a journey. It requires bravery and courage, and you do not have to do it alone. At Pivot Point, I believe we are stronger together. We are one. Let's dig into this week's topic. So we've been on this journey of inclusive leadership and allyship, as we know. Those are interchangeable terms in the minds of us at Pivot Point. We are at episode 9. So we are at a pivot point in the journey where we're going to dig into 3 meaty topics here in episodes 9, 10, and 11. And in particular, one of the areas of bias that we covered in episode 8 is gender. And so I really want to unpack gender and give you some content to feel more comfortable talking about gender in the workplace. And I want to talk about it from a bias perspective, but also some of the things people do, subtle things that people do with regards to gender that really are not fair, and they really are well-intended, but often have negative consequences. So we will unpack some specific scenarios. As always, you'll walk away with some tools, some ideas, some strategies to be better as a leader. So let's dig in to the tools under gender in this module. And this is, again, a sneak peek behind the scenes curtain into the window of our virtual learning program, Lead Like an Ally. You can join, get your first 30 days totally on the house. And in fact, a year subscription is no more than $20 a month per learner. So, gender. Lesson 1, stop benevolent sexism. When I say benevolent sexism, this is a term I learned again in my unconscious bias certification. It essentially means that I have good intentions. It's benevolent. However, it's still sexist. You don't get off the hook. Just because you had good intentions didn't mean they had a good impact. And so when you unpack intentions and impact, I think it makes it really clear to the person, oh, okay, I said this. I didn't realize that was a thing. I didn't realize that was something I shouldn't say. I didn't realize that was a judgment that wasn't fair. I'll do better next time. Let me give you some examples. From a gender perspective, what happens often in sexist behavior, which I hate to even use the ist words because they're very polarizing, but if we're to stick with this term as it stands, and it's very well known in the industry, benevolent sexism is essentially saying or doing something that signals you don't belong from a gender perspective. And this happens often in male-dominated workspaces, far more so to women than to men, although there definitely are some of these microaggressions that also happen to men as well. To women, we make assumptions about ability to travel. Let's go ahead and assume, take gender off the table. Let's go ahead and assume that everyone has a willingness to travel. We don't know until someone tells us that they're not willing to. And this happens much more so to women at the childbearing age, women that have small children or sometimes don't even have children yet, but there's an assumption she might. Traveling is a big one. Another thing is assuming that someone can't work late or can't work nights or weekends because they're a woman, because they're the primary caregiver. And another way this might show up is assuming that if a woman has children, that somehow after a certain amount of children that she will exit the workforce, or somehow is not as committed to her job as she possibly would. A lot of these tie to motherhood, which we'll talk about as another strategy. Conversely, on the male side, I see this happen a lot. My husband, my partner, stays at home. He is constantly told, oh, that's not a real job. Flip that in your mind. Would we say that to a woman that stays at home? So benevolent sexism, in fact, happens everywhere. It is a lot more common than I would like to admit. Good intentions, bad impact. Know your gender bias. So I really want you to think about where bias might show up for you. And we invited you last month to take that implicit association assessment with the folks at Harvard. It's free, no more than 10 minutes. Check it out, implicit.harvard.edu. If you have, great. If you happen to take the gender category, great. Now you know if you have bias or not. For me, I actually have it flipped. Most people have women associated with family and men associated with career. Think about that, the implications of that. What we know to be true is that women are far less likely to get promotions, and especially in those pivotal child raising years, because they often are the primary caregivers. We also know that when a woman finds out she's pregnant and announces that to her team, men that announce they're going to be fathers are far more likely to get promoted. Women are less likely to get promoted in that same moment. We also are more likely to give men pay increases because we assume they're the providers, and we are less likely to give them to women because we assume they're the caretakers. So these assumptions, right, that we talked about, these assumptions, these baked in assumptions that are totally not fair, but have been true in some instances in our experiences. We're remembering that, and our brain, again, loves to make short, quick decisions and layers in that bias. And there's no problem with the bias. The problem is acting upon that bias. So check yourself. And the only way I know to get better is through self-awareness, which is where this whole journey started. But with bias especially, get self-aware around where bias might show up for you and find ways to intervene with it, as we covered in the last episode. Gender bias is everywhere. I mentioned I actually have mine flipped a little bit. I associate women with career, men with family. How this shows up to me as a negative impact is oftentimes if I meet women that are primary caregivers or often spend most of their time inside the home, I somehow don't take them as seriously because I assume women should be in careers and men should be with the family. So no one's right in this whole thing. There's no perfect score. We're not keeping tallies here. Simply knowing that about myself helps me be better, and it helps me not make that assumptions in the future. Lesson 3 in the gender section is around modeling inclusive caregiving leave. This is better for everybody. The more that we have fair parental leave policies. The workplace was largely created by men for men at a time when women were not really in the workforce. Think about the Mad Men era of the 1950s. That's still kind of how the workplace looks. Women are now more than just admins. We do a lot more. There are increasingly more and more women leaders, although we are at a staggering still 5% of CEOs of Fortune 500 companies and roughly 20% of any given C-suite or leadership team or board. We're underrepresented. One of the biggest things that I believe holding back today's woman leader, if she chooses to have children, is that she's assumed to be the primary caregiver. And when we have very few companies paying maternity leave, let alone paternity leave, I prefer parental leave. And those that do see amazing results, those that offer parental leave and have men and women choose how they want to spend their time, who wants to take the first few weeks, who wants to take the last few weeks. There's so many models out there. If you don't have an inclusive caregiving leave policy, you're missing out. And this could be beyond small children. This does not just have to be the little people at home. This could be parents. This could be someone with special needs in your life. Women are much more likely to be that caregiver. So please honor that space and let somebody be a caregiver, and also let them contribute to the workforce. Just because they're a caregiver does not mean they're obsolete in today's workforce. Oftentimes we're not tapping into this workforce. And I see women come back all the time from maternity leave or an extended period at home, and they are so fulfilled and excited and motivated. Gosh, what if we could tap into that? And so many transferable experiences they have from running a household to running a workplace. Fourth principle on gender, be clear about sexual harassment policies. Most companies have one. You probably have some sort of e-learning check the box when somebody starts at your organization. Everybody has to say they went through that compliance training. It does feel very check the boxy, but if that's where you're at, I'm okay with it. What ends up happening is that gets filed away years into an organization. There's, experience, and the person doesn't remember how to report it. And so usually, most of the time, the stats are very high for this, that people do not report sexual harassment. It tends to adversely affect women. Women are far more a part of the statistics around sexual harassment, much more than the majority. So I'm saying this in the gender section because I think you have to be really transparent about what the policy is, who you report it to, how you report it, protection of anonymity, and also that the expectation that this will be investigated. We have a process. Even better, be really transparent about that process. Talk about how many sexual harassment cases you had, because I'm telling you, at the water cooler, people are talking about these things. We cannot brush it under the rug. The more transparent you are about the process, the investigation, that doesn't mean disclosing who's who, but simply being clear about this is not acceptable in our workplace. Here's how we handle it. If you report something, it will be handled this way. I hope you got a lot out of this episode's content. Did you know that you can find all 4 seasons of episodes at nextpivotpoint.com, and you can sign up for the complimentary 30-day preview of our new program, Lead Like an Ally, and order our new book, Lead Like an Ally. I appreciate you listening to this episode. Who do you know that needs to hear this message? Hit the share button. Connect with me on LinkedIn. Simply search Julie Kratz, Kratz. I host this podcast because I believe we are stronger together. We are one.